Hey, what's going on guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'll be doing a first impressions of the PUMA Fuse 3.0. So in this video, I'll share some first thoughts on this model based off my first few sessions. I'll also talk about sizing, some changes between the 2.0 and the 3.0, and I'll discuss my workout with some VO to discuss why I did what I did in this shoe. Now, when it comes to my first impressions, 3 initial takes with this model is number 1, I think the stability has improved in the shoe for the most part. So with the reworked heel construction here, this rubber is a little bit more dense. You still have a pretty pliable forefoot and midfoot, so you do have a nice bouncy responsive forefoot, but in the heel back here, it's a little bit more dense, similar to almost like that blockier textured that the Metcon has been using over the last few iterations. Now this model still has the drop-in midsole, so if you weren't a fan of that in the Fuse 1.0 and 2.0, you're not gonna like that with the 3.0. You do start to notice this insole, I think, once you start loading over 400 pounds. Does it take away from the stability? Not necessarily, you just feel it, but for the most part, I think the overall stability of this shoe should be fine for most lifters and athletes. So if you're on the fence for this model regarding stability for strength training, I think it will work for most lifting thresholds. The second first impression that I have with this shoe is the toe box is really interesting. So PUMA has mentioned that they kind of widen this model, and so what I think they mean by that is right here at the base of the forefoot, it is decently wide, and that's not what's tight in the shoe. What's tight in the shoe is this really aggressive taper. So for example, if you have a blockier forefoot, or if you just like having more room for your toes to splay, I think this is gonna be a little bit problematic for you. I have an E-width foot, and after 2 sessions in this model, I still find them to be a little bit snug. Now, if I'm just lifting, it's not the biggest deal. But where I notice it is if I'm doing sled pushes or any form of agility work where I'm heavily into the forefoot and on the toe, that's when I start to feel this lateral side press into my toes. So that said, I think if you do have a wide foot and you're already kind of hesitant with this shoe, look into other options. There are other models that size wider than this shoe, the Dropset Trainer 2, the Savage 1, the Victus Core Gym, even the Metcon 9. They all have wider toe boxes than this model. Now the base again of the forefoot is widened, sure, but with this aggressive taper, I almost feel like it kind of defeats the purpose, and I wish they would have just widened this a little bit because as you can see, like it is pretty dang aggressive, and the upper doesn't have the biggest volume, so you do notice this toe box press in with the synthetic material here. My third first impression with this shoe is for the most part, the durability seems like it's gonna be improved. Now, with durability specifically, something I ran into with my 2.0s is after enough rope climbs, I started to have that midfoot burn up. This rubber seems a little bit better regarding its quality, and I wonder if that's why the PUMA Fuse 3.0 has a higher price point. There are more materials with this model. Looks like there's a little bit more tech in the shoe. This model costs $120 versus $100 like the 2.0 cost. So I'm wondering long term how that's going to fare regarding durability. Thus far, it seems pretty solid. Now, I will say, with the upper construction, while the mesh feels a little bit more durable, you still have that light synthetic overlay, so this would not be a shoe that I would play with outdoors on concrete if you're doing any form of toe drag work, because I tore up my last toe box doing that, so definitely keep that in mind. But for the most part, if you're just using this shoe for gym sessions where you're doing cross training and lifting, I think this model should work pretty dang well. Something else to note with this shoe is it feels pretty heavy, and even for my size 10 model here, let's get a live action weight because I actually haven't weighed them officially yet. They weigh 15 ounces. So this is definitely a heavier shoe. So if you like a lighter weight shoe, that would definitely be something that I'd be a little concerned with this model. Now, when talking sizing of the PUMA Fuse 3.0, I think most athletes and lifters should be safe going true to size in this model, but that's with a caveat. If you have a wider foot, I would say size up a half size or pass on this model entirely, especially for folks who have a wider forefoot. I think you're gonna find this toe box pretty aggressive. I have an E-width foot and I picked up on this right away. So I think if you have a wider foot than an E-width, or if you just have a very blocky forefoot and toe box, then you're definitely going to notice this. Something else that I'm not the most fond of with this shoe regarding its sizing and just overall fit is you kind of have this asymmetric lacing system. So it's not traditional in the sense that it comes straight up the shoe. It's kind of off to the lateral side. That's interesting. I don't necessarily love it or hate it. I do think it gives the shoe a little bit of an interesting fit regarding its upper construction, but that's not necessarily a full knock on the shoe sizing or performance. It's just one of those personal things. Like if you didn't like that in the Rain 5, for example, I don't think you're gonna like that in the 3.0. But that said, let's talk about some differences that you can expect with the 3.0 from the 2.0. All right, so let's go over some construction differences between the 2.0 and the 3.0 over here. So in the 2.0, it had this lighter weight construction throughout the forefoot and midfoot. In the 3.0, this has been beefed up a little bit. So even the material around the toe box has been increased a little bit. It's still this light light synthetic overlays, so I tread lightly, and that's why I mentioned like be careful on concrete where you might have friction, because I'm starting to tear up this model over here. But the materials as a whole seem a little bit more reinforced, which I personally like. They just feel a little bit more heavy and they give you a bit more security around the foot. Another difference to keep in mind is the lacing system. So in the 2.0 here, you have a traditional lacing system. In the 3.0, you have this asymmetrical build. I think that's going to be pretty polarizing. I don't know if everybody's going to love it. It's one of those features that I can kind of take or leave. I don't really mind it per se, but I think it does give the shoe a slightly different fit. Granted, I could be biased just because of how many shoes I'm reviewing. I traditionally like a regular lacing system though. With this model, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 core eyelets that go up. That is one less eyelet than the 2.0 had, so that's another little difference. And with this model too, something that's interesting is just the laces. They're super long, so you will have to double knot this shoe, and if you do have to crank them tight, that's gonna be definitely something to keep in mind. Another difference between these shoes is their heel construction. So in the 3.0, you have a much blockier heel, and it just feels like it's a bit more dense regarding its overall construction. You still have a TPU plate here for additional slide for handstand push-ups, similar to the Fuse Point 2.0, but the heel itself does have a bit more stability in my opinion. And then looking at the midfoot constructions, once again, with the 3.0, you have a bit more material here to give you bite for rope climbs and additional support. So the lateral feel in the shoe was pretty solid for the most part. The upper up here could be a little bit more reinforced, but again, with that lower volume toe box, I don't know if spillover is going to be a massive issue for most folks unless you have an exceptionally wide foot. And then the last difference to note between these shoes is their overall weight. The 3.0 is a little bit heavier, and when it comes to width and their overall fit and feel, they both feel pretty similar. However, I know the 3.0 has been widened a little bit, allegedly. I do think it fits a little bit snugger, and I'm curious for your guys' feedback as well. So if you have worn the 2.0 and you get the 3.0, do you find it to be a little bit snugger out of the box? Do you think it's gonna break in? I feel like after a couple weeks, the shoe will break in just because the material is lighter. However, definitely something to keep in mind if you do have a wide foot once again and you plan to invest in this shoe. Overall though, I think those are like the massive construction details that I would keep in mind between these models. The 3.0 feels like it's a higher quality shoe, but time will tell once we really start testing and abusing this model. Hatfield squat day, aka my favorite day in the gym right now. So for today, we had a 12, 10, 8 rep scheme with an ascending load. For my 12, I hit 285. For my 10, 325. And then for my set of 8, we hit 375. It felt really good because we're finally starting to get back to heavier loads after our knee injury. And if you've ever injured yourself, how good does it feel when you're finally feeling like that progress and all of the accumulation of work you've done is starting to pay off? A sneaky way that I like to kind of test where my knee is at is after my volume work, for example, pushing a heavy triple at about like a 1 to 2 RIR. Today's heavy triple was right at about 435, apologies there, and it felt really good. Depth felt good, speed felt good, and my knee is not swollen, so that's a really good sign that progress is being made there. For my accessories, we had some Sumo RDLs with a kettlebell. These are fantastic. I actually plan on building out a guide for these in the very near future, so if you're not programming these now, I would highly suggest doing so. They're awesome for giving your hips a little bit of additional work, giving your glute a nice stimulus, and they just kind of get you out of that traditional RDL range of motion. This is my thought angle, so to all my boys out there, what's going on? But that said, these have been sick, and I feel like after my heavier squats, it's awesome to kind of open up the hips and just really elongate those hamstrings and give them a nice stimulus without going crazy heavy with the RDL weight. We also had some goblet step-ups. These have been a staple for just accruing extra volume for really helping that tendon feel better in that concentric movement pattern. For my accessories after this, I hit a little bit of core hip flexor work, some Spanish squats, and some soleus calf raises. Those have been awesome for helping me just tune up the legs as a whole as well. All right, guys, that wraps up this first impressions video of the PUMA Fuse 3.0. I will have full review content coming out on this model very soon, so if you don't want to wait for that content and you have questions, drop a comment below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. But as always, I appreciate you supporting the channel. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. See you in the next one.